You're listening to a 3CR podcast recorded in the 3CR Community Radio Studio in Melbourne, Australia. If you like what you hear, please consider donating or subscribing so we can keep bringing you more independent community content. For more information, go to 3cr.org.au.
Well. Welcome to the Anarchist World this week. We are about to blast off into the Community Radio Network orbit. But before that, we've got a few things happening you may be interested in. No, nothing tonight, unfortunately. But on the 30th, there'll be a dinner down at Frankston, La Porchetta, for listeners to the Anarchist World this week. You're all welcome. 6:30pm start. You pay for your own food and drinks. Great crowd. Should be a good crowd next Wednesday the 30th, as I expect a lot of people there, as the election campaign is coming to a close. Now, I'd like to thank all those people who are involved in the Toscano for Flinders campaign. I'm running on a socially progressive and economically radical ticket. And if you want to know more about that, just go to the Facebook page, Toscano for Flinders, and please share the material. It doesn't matter if it goes to people in Flinders or not. The whole purpose of the campaign is to get some ideas across regarding how to raise revenue from the rich and powerful to resolve many of the insoluble problems we have as a community. Now, what else? The 1st of May, as you know or may not know, we're doing an all-nighter. That's the Talkback with Attitude crew from about 12:30 to about 6 a.m. And then we'll be back. That's right, we'll be back from 10 to 11. And at 12 o'clock I'll be doing the May Day walk, where we look at sites which were pivotal in the establishment of May Day here in Melbourne, many of this, and also many anarchist sites, because at the 19th century, the Melbourne Anarchist Club, which was formed on the 1st of May 1886, was one of the few was the primary organisation that was involved in the organisation of the first May Days in this country. And on the 4th of May, which is a Sunday, we're having a picnic at Rosebud Picnic Ground next to the Village Green, next to the Rosebud Bowling Club across the road from the Rosebud Hotel, to celebrate our participation in the federal election. Now, obviously, we don't expect to be the member for Flinders, but we'd like to thank all those people who are involved in that campaign to bring new ideas across to so many people in an era when you need them. Interestingly, residents of the Mornington Peninsula will be very pleased with their local council, which has just passed a legislation to rescind their climate emergency policies, considering the situation they find themselves in. It's a difficult. The cows have wandered in, and they're in holiday mode.
Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction, in the fields of bodies burning, as the war machine keeps turning, death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed mind.
Welcome to the Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia on the National Community Radio Satellite. Listen to the Anarchist World this week, Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. Listen to analysis of local, national, international events. Listen to analysis you'll never hear anywhere else.
Welcome to the Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. My name is Joseph Toscano. This program is podcast. You can access the podcast by going to 3cr.org.au. And as an avowed anarchist, that's right, that was I was described as an avowed anarchist in the local rag down in the Mornington Peninsula. I'd like to explain what anarchism is all about. Anarchos without rulers. It's about creating a society without rulers, not without rules. What creates the disasters we see in Gaza, or in southern Lebanon, the West Bank, Sudan, Ukraine, and many other parts of the world? It's inequalities in power and wealth. Ultimately, anarchism is about holding wealth in common and using it for the common good, and devolving power to ensure those people involved in a decision make that decision. It's not based on representation, giving somebody a signed blank cheque to make decisions for you for the next 3 to 4 years when they don't actually have the power to make the decisions which are important in society. It's a society based on direct democratic means. So if you're involved in the struggle to devolve power, that's share power, and hold wealth in common and use it for the common good, you're an anarchist, and be proud of it. I thought it was one of the most wonderful things I could have seen in print, an avowed anarchist, very proud. Proud. All right. Now, you all know Pope Francis, an 88-year-old man, has died. See, the Catholic Church is an interesting institution. It's existed for over 2,000 years, and it's based on a strict hierarchical principle. And I've been brought up as a Catholic as a little kid until I was about 7 or 8 when I realised the fallacy of it all. Religion, that is, not just Catholicism. The fact is, it's a highly hierarchical institution where the Pope, theoretically, is God's representative on earth. Now, look, I've got nothing against Pope Francis, you know, but I am amazed. I'm amazed by the coverage on the government-gelded ABD and sections of the corporate media. It's as if it's some, mythical, pivotal moment in human history. And the 3 words, I think the commentators have, been copying each other. 3 words I hear constantly about the late Pope Francis are empathy, love for the poor. There's one other. Empathy, love for the poor, and humility. And we celebrate this man because of his empathy, love for the poor, and humility. Now, I've always believed that these are 3 principles that we need to live our life by. Empathy is fundamental to human existence in many ways. It's wired in our DNA, I should say. Because to be empathetic ensures cohesiveness in a society and decreases tension. And as a herd animal, and that's what we are eventually, a herd animal, empathy is fundamental. So have we come to this juncture in human history in the 21st century where one man's empathy, humility, and concern for the poor is something which is celebrated? Because these are 3 terms which should be part and parcel of everyday life. Now, obviously, we're all human. We've got feet of clay, and we all make mistakes, and we all have regrets. But I find it fascinating that these are the words that have been used to describe this man's place in human history. I mean, empathy has become a dirty word. Humanity has become a dirty word. Concern for the poor has become a dirty word, or 3 dirty words. 4 dirty words. And the list goes on and on. So, enjoy the spectacle. But remember, empathy, concern for the poor, and humility are basic human traits and basic anarchist traits. You're listening to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcasts across Australia, courtesy of the Community Radio Network. Sometimes you wonder. Now, Pope Francis could have done things differently. You know, I can be empathetic and I can be sympathetic. But the fact is, they're words. Now, Pope Francis, and hopefully the next Pope, these were international figures, not just a following among the 1.4 billion Catholics in the world, but a human being in charge of a sovereign state, which the Vatican City is, who had something to say regarding the fate of humanity. But what, sometimes I feel like I'm a Don Quixote tilting at virtual platforms. But something that he could have done, and something any world leader can do, who's concerned about the atrocities which are committed on a daily basis in Gaza, where you've got 2 million people being collectively punished for the activities of Hamas. Men, women and children, mainly women and children, bearing the brunt. And that's what happens in modern warfare. It's the defenceless, the elderly, women, children, pregnant women, who bear the brunt of the atrocities. Now, it's interesting to see all these world leaders, including the late Pope Francis, kind of tut-tutting about the situation. Wouldn't it be nice if we move from empathy and sympathy to action? Why don't we see world leaders who find what's happening in Gaza totally unacceptable congregating on the Egyptian side of the Gaza border? It's one thing for the Israeli Defence Forces, those heroes in the Israeli Defence Forces, to shoot at unarmed people. It's another thing to prevent world leaders, and maybe a future Pope in his Pope-mobile, crossing the Gaza border, crossing into Gaza, acting as human shields to protect people from the barbarity that has been unleashed on the Palestinians in Gaza. Wouldn't it be nice to see maybe the British Prime Minister or the French President, the next Pope, even our future Prime Minister, standing there, demanding to be let inside? Because the time has come where action is needed. Action is needed not just by people who protest about the atrocities, people like myself, but people in positions of authority who've finally understood that what is happening in Gaza is totally beyond the pale. So I encourage the next Pope, whoever he may be, because it will be a he, obviously, get the Pope Mobile, wander down to the border. I'm sure the Egyptian authorities would be more than happy to allow you to, come into Egypt. Wander down to the Gaza crossing and attempt to cross into Gaza to highlight the atrocities, the daily atrocities which are occurring in there, courtesy of the Israeli state. Listen to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia of other community radio network, Obviously, Sudan, which is going through a particularly vicious civil war, which I spoke about last week, where a paramilitary group which was established by the previous dictatorship under al-Bashir attempted to take over the country. And many people with nothing, over 60% of Sudanese have now been internally displaced or externally displaced, have been shot to death for nothing because of the personal ambition of individuals. Then you go to Ukraine. Here we have a people who are subjected to atrocities because they weren't able to negotiate with the Russian Empire, because they've been prodded by the Western interests, including United States interests, to join NATO, become part of the European Union. And now they're paying the price of that. So here we've got three situations: Gaza, Sudan, Ukraine. You can feel empathy, you can feel sympathy, but ultimately it's world leaders. That's right. Many elected, many self-appointed, who have the ability to stop the carnage. Now, you may say I'm a Don Quixote, but the fact is we do need Don Quixotes to raise issues in order to get people to think beyond what is termed to be polite, acceptable behaviour. Let's move on. It was good to see that residents in Footscray protested yesterday because of another police death, another death at the hands of Victoria Police. It's becoming all too common, especially in Victoria. It reminds me of the situation about 20 years ago, where police deal with the situations by basically shooting the offender dead, or the alleged offender dead. The dilemma is when they're dead, there's nobody to speak for them. But in this case, Ahmed, who was shot dead by Victoria Police, had a family. He was a well-known member of that community, had his problems. But when was it acceptable to shoot dead people who have got mental health issues? It doesn't just happen in Footscray, it happens all over this state. What happens is there's an internal police inquiry, coroner's investigation. It's all brushed aside. Nobody's ever charged. The training that Victoria police officers receive is not reviewed. And we see the same thing happening over and over again. Now, obviously, in a society where inequality is growing at a rapid rate, and inequality is growing at a rapid rate in Australian society, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, the fact is that social cohesion disintegrates, violence increases, the good burgers clamour for more jails and harsher sentences, thinking that you can police your way out of problems which are caused by growing inequality in this country. And that's the problem. The problem is, why are so many young people involved in criminal activity? Why? Is it because they believe they have no future in this current society? Is it because there's nothing for them if they don't fit into the current education system? And even if they do fit in, there's nothing at the end of the day. So these are things that we should look at, not as isolated individual actions, but as part of a growing problem which no organisation, I'm sure the Victorian Police Association will tell you, you can police your way out of it. And that's the dilemma that we face in Australia in 2025. When you have a private charity, and I know I've mentioned this before, but when you have a private charity asking Australians to sponsor Australian kids to go to get a decent public education, you know there's something critically wrong in our society. When people talk about the cost of living crisis, and it's a real crisis, the cost of living crisis is not felt by the investment class or the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, and many people in secure government jobs. But the cost of living crisis is felt by people on social security benefits because they lead a hand-to-mouth existence. I mean, when have you heard one word in this election campaign about the 1/3 of Australians, that's about 7 million, 8 million, a bit more, who rely on social security benefits to survive? It's as if they don't exist in this election campaign. It's as if the only thing that's important is giveaways to the middle classes, giveaways in order to seduce people to vote in this passionless bean counting exercise which is called a federal election. Just extraordinary. I've been on this planet for 73 years and I've been through a lot of federal election campaigns. And I've never seen a more stupid, ignorant campaigns by both sides, which is not based on the reality which people face. Now, as you know, I'm standing in the electorate of Flinders as an independent on a economically radical and socially progressive platform. But you see, I say this every week, 27 million, or 27.2 million, I'm told, people living on a resource-rich continent, and we have 1/3 of Australians living a hand-to-mouth existence on social security benefits, who are the major casualties of inflation and cost of living, the cost of living crisis. We can't even take care of a significant number of this country's children. At least 1 million, I'm told 1.5 million children live in poverty in this country. I mean, they're born into difficult situations through no fault of their own, but they're expected. They're expected, to bear the cost of the structural inequalities. It reminds me of a reverse stall gift. Now, those of you who are not familiar with the stall gift, it's a handicapped race where the faster you run, the further behind you start. We saw that during Easter, the Easter stall gift. Big prizes, but it's a handicap race. It's a little bit like a horse race for human beings. No, they don't carry saddles, but it's a handicap race. So the fastest start at the back and the slowest start at the front. Okay? Seems fair enough. But life is a little bit different, In life, it's the other way around. It's not a stall gift. Everybody has a chance. In life, if you're not born in the right circumstances, where you can access the best healthcare money can buy, and the best education money can buy, and the best future money can buy, and the best housing money can buy, you start 100 metres behind. Think about it. 100 metres behind the starting block in 100 metres race. How can you outrun those people who start on the finishing line? And that's the problem we have in Australian society today. Too many people are starting way behind the finishing line, and some are starting on the finishing line because of an accident of birth. What's fair about that? How much money do you need to have a good life? Do you need billions of dollars? Of course not. Think about it. What a ridiculous... situation. We're not living in some God-forsaken military dictatorship that has no natural resources and too many people to be fed. This nation that calls itself Australia should be the greatest place on earth for the people living on this continent, especially this country's original inhabitants, First Nations people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. But no, it's the other way around. And why is it the other way around? Is there any discussion during this federal election why it's the other way around? And if candidates like yours truly raise this issue, does anybody pick up? Does anybody look at the fundamental problems? It's as if we don't exist. The only people that exist are two talking heads, two bean counters, passionless human beings who have nothing to say about anything in particular, trying to bribe people. No vision for the country. Just a promise, we'll put some more money in your pocket if you've got money there already. What a pathetic state we find ourselves in. You're listening to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. My name's himToscano. I'm hosting today's program. I try to talk the talk and walk the walk. Now, obviously, as an individual, it's very difficult. As an individual, for a bit of support, becomes a bit more easier. But the trouble is, too many of us shrug our shoulders and say, what's the point? You can't fight City Hall. It's always going to be like this. There's always going to be inequality. It's a little bit like 300 years ago and people saying, there's always going to be slavery. Or 200 years ago when people said there's always going to be atrocities against First Nations people as the colonial empire expands into the hinterland. The fact is, it's people like you that make the difference. It's not about empathy, although empathy is important. It's not about being sympathetic or humble. It's about taking an interest in what's happening around you and joining the dots and joining that struggle to share power and share wealth. Let's move on. I've noticed that Buffolini, our little mate, in the US of A, has got a Guernsey to attend Pope Francis' funeral. Isn't that nice? I wonder if Netanyahu and Putin also got a Guernsey. Interesting. I doubt it, but you never know. How extraordinary to allow this buffoon, this Mussolini clone, to actually attend the funeral of the late Pope Francis. I'm sure he's not in his grave yet, he's being displayed, but I'm sure when he gets into his grave, he's going to be turning thinking, what's that person doing at my funeral? All right, let's move on. Harvard fights back. Unlike Mr. Dutton and Mr. Albanese, Harvard University in the US of A is fighting back the buffoon's attempts to destroy that institution. Interesting, isn't it? You got the buffoon waving his hand about saying, you got to do this and you got to do that. I've signed an executive order, acting like a dictator. Theoretically, they're supposed to be buffers to the power which is exercised by the president. And now we have a buffoon saying to the Supreme Court, oh, piss off. What you say doesn't matter. I'll do what I like. And saying to the universities, well, if you don't like it, I'll just take all your funding away. All right? Put up with it. Extraordinary. And the business community, wrings their hand thinking, where will all this end? Will this make America great again? Well, let's see. But one good thing I've seen, all my life, I have never wanted to visit the evil empire. Yeah, I'm not talking about Darthgate or whatever his name is. The real evil empire. Never. Never had the desire. Never had the desire to drive down Route 66. Never had the desire to go to Las Vegas and lose a few $1,000s. Never had the desire to go to Disneyland. And the list goes on and on. But I will make one confession. In 2007, I accidentally found myself in Alaska. Yes, I've got regrets. But it's interesting to see that the number of tourists going to the US of A are beginning to decrease quite noticeably. Who wants to be subjected to some redneck border guard interrogating you when you want to go into the land of the so-called brave and the free? Who wants to go to a society which has no empathy, no sympathy, which is totally transactional? I'll give you $1 if you'll bend over and let me play with you. Totally transactional. Who wants to waste their dollar there? We have a world in front of us. I mean, I'm attempting, and the key word is attempting, to boycott all American companies and goods. That's my individual reaction. And it can be your individual reaction. There are many United States-owned franchises in this country, too numerous to list. You want something? You go to Amazon. You want a burger? You go to another place. You want a coffee? You go to another place. And the list goes on and on. You want to watch, something on, on pay TV? Oh, many options. But you do have options as human beings. We do have options. And in a capitalist society, one based on private investment for private profit, the boycott, if it's taken up by a significant number of people, can actually have a significant impact. So if you're unhappy with Buffolinis, outrages, you do have a choice. You don't have to interact with the US of A in any way or any of its corporations. When you buy a soft drink, look which company makes it. When you buy a burger, look at which company makes it. When you want to buy something on the net, look at which company makes it. It's very simple. Doesn't take much. Maybe a few dollars you don't spend mean nothing, but if millions of people do the same thing, well, it may mean something. This is the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. Now, ANZAC Day, it's on Friday, 2 days' time. Now, look, we're told that we face the greatest threat since World War II. Well, I'm old enough to remember those wonderful maps coming out of Southeast Asia with the big yellow arrow in the late 60s and early 70s telling us about the Chinese hordes which were going to invade Australia. And the fact that, the government of the day felt so threatened that they introduced conscription. Not for people like me who are at university, but for working class people, They've always been the disposable part in any war, disposable humans in any war. And many Australians who are still now in their 70s were conscripted to fight the good fight in Vietnam, and they came back and they were ostracised, pushed aside. And I can understand people wanting to come together on ANZAC Day that have been involved in campaigns across the world over many years. It's logical. Because obviously, in a period when you're involved in active combat, it's the relationship you develop with the people that you're with which determine whether you live or die. And obviously those bonds run deep and they're important. They should be celebrated. But I am perplexed, and I've been perplexed for many decades regarding the stories that float around Australia's involvement in World War I. And I'd just like to set the record straight, because I'm not interested in myths and legends. I'm interested in reality, which obviously is not a saleable commodity in the 21st century world. It's all about manufactured reality, which isn't a reality. Now, Australia was a deeply divided nation during World War I. That is a fact. From a population of 5 million people, 420,000 60,000 young men volunteered to be sacrificed on the killing fields of Europe, not for freedom, not for democracy, but for the glory of King, God and country. Simple. That's a fact. I mean, World War I was essentially a trade war between imperial powers, which are trying to flex their muscles. And the people involved who were slaughtered in their millions in World War I were basically workers at either end of a bayonet. And of the 420,000 young Australians who volunteered, 62,000, that's what, almost 20% or just over 20%, died on the European killing fields. Not for democracy, not for freedom, but as I said before, for God, King and country. Of those left behind, the casualty rate was so horrendous that the Billy Hughes-led coalition of Labor renegades and National Party people decided they needed conscription, because once the body count began to rise, people decided this is not for me and refused to volunteer, although the legislation was changed to criminalise people who are against conscription. And the conscription debates, which occurred before the first conscription referendum in December 1916, were quite violent affairs. Organisations like the Industrial Workers of the World were outlawed because they spearheaded the anti-conscription struggle. I think it was on the 16th of December, I could have the wrong day there, it could have been the 19th of December, 1916. The people of Australia, including soldiers at the front, voted, because it was a plebiscite, not a referendum, they voted against conscription. Although our English overlords were telling us we need more men to be sacrificed on the killing fields in Europe. And a second conscription referendum at the end of 1917 was again defeated by a wider margin. So who knows about this? Sorry, conscription plebiscite, not a referendum, plebiscite. Get it right, Joe. Do we ever talk about this? I mean, there is a little monument inside Trades Hall on the Lygon Street entrance to the anti-conscription struggle. To those men and women who are jailed, who are involved in protests, whose actions led to the defeat of 2 conscription plebiscites. And they saved another 60,000 young Australian men dying on the European killing fields for God, King and country. But do you ever hear this side of the story? Never. Do you hear about the riots, the food riots in 1917? The general strike in 1917 against the inflationary pressures? Has the warmongers profited on the bodies and bones of workers fighting at the either end of a bayonet? Do you hear about the 60,000 other Australians who came back from that 420,000 who died within 10 years of their wounds? It's almost a third, if not more than a third, of the total volunteers. And of the deep scars, mental and physical, that many bore for the rest of their lives. So Anzac Day is important. It's important that people who've been involved in war, whether it's a war you agree or disagree with, come together, replenish their bonds. I've got a great deal of respect for that. But I have no respects for the warmongers, which you will see on Anzac Day, the stay-at-home patriots, which is an increasing number in our society, as Dutton, raises the jingoistic sword with his little defence package, who hijack what Anzac Day should be about, to promote war, to promote division. So if you see it on the day, call it out. The promotion of war and division and fear and hatred has nothing to do with what Anzac Day should stand for. You're listening to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. This program is streaming live on 3cr.org.au. The program is podcast. You can access the podcast by going to 3cr.org.au. Have you noticed how Buffolini's little mate, the member, I think it's for Dixon, on a 1.5% margin, is kind of denied his friend? If you want to use a biblical analogy, it reminds me of when St. Peter denied Christ 3 times before he was crucified. You have little Buffolini running around saying, "Oh, he's not my mate anymore. We gotta, we gotta look beyond him." Well, that's the way things go. Now, the what's in it for me election. Now, I have noticed that in the last 24 hours that people involved in gender, against gender violence are arcing up a little bit because they haven't been mentioned during this election campaign. And I know we've had 3 particularly dull, passionless debates to date, which I haven't looked at. I'll leave that up to you. I mean, I've got better things to do in my life. And I have noticed, as I said before, that the 1/3 of Australians on social security benefits don't even rate a mention. And that the debate, in inverted commas, seems to be this staged, managed little affair where the reporters from the government guild at ABC and the corporate-owned media jump on a little bus and they wait for their orders, and the leaders rush to some site and do their thing, hoping that there'll be no protesters there to kind of put some reality into the situation. Remember when Mr. Morrison, the man who didn't hold the hose, turned up at the fires and this old bloke told him to piss off? Well, they don't want that. It doesn't look good on TV when real human beings interact with them. And then the assembled pack runs away at midday, writes their articles, does their interviews, and regales the rest of us with their policies. And I cry. This is democracy in action, where the 1% who own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication continue to dominate the parliamentary agenda, continue to dominate the promises which we're showered with. It's a little bit like going into a department store and you're told, you put your name, address, email, telephone number on this little site and you could win a prize. And then for the next 10 years you get shit advertising shit from these organisations, and then they sell your stuff to somebody else. And here we have promises. 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 We promise you a $1,200 tax refund for low and middle income earners. Not to be outdone, we'll promise you $1,000 tax for everybody. We will promise you 25 cents off the Bowser. We will promise to reduce your taxes. Where are the promises about looking seriously at the issues which face us? For example, housing. It's all about handouts to the private sector. Nothing about public housing. Not even social and affordable housing. It's ridiculous. Reality doesn't seem to fit the current parliamentary agenda. And that's because you and me, that's right, we've allowed this to happen. As I said before, for far too long, we've all been part of the somebody should do something about that tribe. You know, I don't like that. You know, I don't like it. I just don't like it. Next beer, thank you. I don't like that. Somebody should do something about that. Ever thought that maybe it's your duty to do something about that? If we all sat back and said somebody should do something about that, nothing would ever happen, would it? And then those who've gone a step further and say, well, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. Well, obviously, we're all going to do this and going to do that. But the fact is, most of us don't do this and don't do that because life interferes with everyday reality. So it's all very well for me to, make derogatory remarks about the Duttons and the Albaneses and the Bants of the world. But the fact is that ultimately, in a parliamentary democracy, and that's what we have, a representative democracy, we get the leaders we deserve. And if they're leaders who are not willing to stand up to the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, who hold over 45% of the wealth in their hands, that's 1%, not the 40% that own 1% of the wealth, we get more of the same. Well, there's not enough money to deal with childhood poverty. There's not enough money to deal with public education or public hospitals. Now, I'm involved in a campaign, right? Toscano for Flinders. Flinders covers the Mornington Peninsula and Western Port region, and I'm involved in that campaign because I was invited by residents, many listening to the Anarchist World this week, who wanted a real choice. And the program I've put forward is very simple. It doesn't need revolution. It just needs a majority vote in Parliament. It's very simple. It's about increasing the revenue stream. In a capitalist society based on a private investment for private profit mantra, instead of wasting our time handing out money to the corporate sector, isn't it about time we built up the public sector? And we can do this in three very simple ways. Even an idiot like me can actually elucidate these policies. 1, a 1% financial transaction tax. 2, a 1% stock market tax when you buy or sell a stock or share. 3, nationalise this country's mineral resources. Simple. Takes a bit of courage. The Clive Palmers of the world won't like it. The Twiggy Forrests of the world won't like it. The Gina Rightarts of the world won't like it. But the fact is, they're just a few individual. We're talking about assisting millions of Australians who find themselves at the bottom of the heap. And all those in between who are saddled with debt up to their neck till the day they die. So, how's the campaign going? Well, you never know how a campaign's going. Now, people say I've got a snowflake's chance in hell of being elected. And the experts say, you'll like this one, the experts say that I'm a modern-day Don Quixote tilting at virtual platforms. As I said before, we do need Don Quixotes to raise issues. Now, wouldn't it be surprising if I did a Bradbury, yeah, and I put a cat among the parliamentary pigeons in Canberra? I'm old enough, I've got nothing to lose, I've got the experience. But the fact is that it's not going to happen. But what is going to happen through this campaign, and what is happening, is people have been exposed to different ways of dealing with the issues we face. Now, a little bit of comedy. There was an article in the local press regarding preference distribution in the Flinders electorate. Now, you'll like this, and I thought I might as well end up with a little bit of fun. The Liberal Party, remember there are 7 candidates in the Flinders electorate, 2 independents, and neither of us allocated preferences, and 5 political parties, okay? Now, the Liberal Party put me 3rd on their list, to the chagrin of many of the more divisive candidates from, other little political parties. The ALP, in true ALP fashion, put me below the Liberal candidate. It looks like the policies that I'm elucidating are a little bit more dangerous than the policies which the Liberal Party is talking about. So here we have the great ALP, the People's Party, putting the Liberal Party above me on their preference sheet. And then we have the tragedy of the trumpets of whatever they're called, of patriots. The poor candidates have been knifed by Clive Palmer. They've put the Teal Independent 2nd. And he ran a campaign on fighting the Labor, Greens, Teal, evil empire. He's got no credibility. He's pissed off. He's going to change his how to vote card and tell Clive Palmer where to go. So it's interesting. So keep your eye out in your local electorate. If you decide to vote, and you may not, which is totally illegal, but if you decide to vote, look at the policies. Spend a few minutes looking at the people's policies. It is a preferential system. Put who you like first, and then who you think should be in government, somewhere down the preference list. You've been listening to The Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. My name's Joseph Toscano. This program is podcast. You can access the podcast by going to 3cr.org.au. That's 3cr.org.au. Listen in to The Anarchist World This Week on your local community radio station, courtesy of the Community Radio Network. And for Victorian listeners, the program is repeated at 5 a.m. on Friday morning. So all those people who can't sleep, have a listen. Thank you once again for listening to The Anarchist World This Week on your local community radio station, courtesy of the Community Radio Network.
Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction.
An analysis you'll never hear anywhere else. Anarchist World This Week, Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. 10 a.m. every Wednesday. Listen to The Anarchist World This Week for an up-to-date analysis of local, national and international events.
Poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh, Lord, yeah.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast. If you found it valuable, please consider donating or subscribing to support independent community radio. To find out more, go to 3cr.org.au.